One, two, three.
Welcome to Scealta. My name is Joe Austin. Can I remind you, if you've just joined us, that Scealta is a joint production of Feile and Feile An Phobail. My guest today hails all the way from Dublin and everywhere else in between. He is a podcaster, a writer, a guide, a historian. He is someone who you will have seen on the national airways, mostly defending our interest, and by that I mean Irish interest, as opposed to whatever else is being imposed or thrown at us. It's Lorcan Collins. So Lorcan, welcome to Scealta. I'm absolutely delighted that you're able to join us this afternoon.
Well, I'm delighted to be here, Joe, and thanks very much for having me. Really excited to talk to you and looking forward to the next little while.
I want to ask you some very obvious questions. They're obvious to me, and I've heard you speaking before, and I know you'll address them well. You've just came in from a tour as we speak. So you've come in from a tour and you're sitting down and you're doing another feature of your many talents. Someone told me that when the career teacher in school asked you what you wanted to do, you said, "I don't really care as long as it's outside." And you've certainly got your will. So I described you there as all those above, author, podcaster, historian, all of that. So let's begin, if there is a beginning. Where did your interest in history come from?
Well, Joe, it's funny you should bring up that career guidance teacher, because I was only thinking about that recently enough. And I remember it was, say, 1985 or so. And he says to me, "What do you want to do?" And I was saying, well, anything that's outdoors. And in my mind, I was kind of thinking I would like to be maybe a logger or a park ranger or something like this. And he's just looking at me, and I remember him writing down, and I think he said something like, "I'll put you down for the bank," or something like this, I never thought about tour guiding. And like all things, you kind of fall into your niche when it just comes along. But I did do a fair few jobs before this, and I don't even really consider this a job. But immediately after school, I went into the accountancy profession, and I was absolutely disastrous at that. I got fired from more jobs than any other fella I know. But the reason I suppose I was fired consistently was because I was never happy in that area. I used to sometimes think about Michael Collins in the same job and how he probably excelled at it, but knew deep down he had a greater calling. But I did plumbing because my father is a good plumber, was a great plumber, and I did that for a few years with him. I worked in the Elephant and Castle, one of the busiest restaurants in Temple Bar, for a few years as well. But thankfully, around about 1996, I decided to merge an interest in Irish revolutionary history with guiding. Where it comes from, I suppose, if I think back, I had a grandfather who was in the IRA, who fought for Ireland, and his wife, my grandmother, was a Connolly member as well. And they were anti-treaty IRA as well. So I suppose there was always those great stories growing up about the fight for Irish freedom, for Irish rights as well. And I guess at the back of your head, those little stories are always kind of swimming around there. I remember as a kid, plenty of sing-songs in the house as well. And while I liked other music, such as, the Boomtown Rats or the Specials, I was also one of those weird 14-year-old kids who had no problem throwing on the Clancy Brothers as well, while I was on my own, never in front of my mates, and singing along to, Kelly, the boy from Killaan, or, the Ballad of James Connolly. So I think music plays a role in developing your interest in Irish revolutionary history as well,
Well, you probably are aware that we're broadcasting from the Connolly Centre. And you can see the ballot behind me, where Connolly, in that proposed debate with Pearse, what direction, who do you listen to, and all of that. And the purpose of the Connolly Centre was to to reunite people with our revolutionary history, of which you've done an excellent job. But if you were to believe what you're told about Dublin in particular and the rest of Ireland in general, from a northern perspective, you'll have been told nobody cares. There's no interest. This is stuff that's gone by the by. We're more interested in how you order your food in French or how you get to Italy on a cheap flight. You mentioned tours. I don't see you as a tour guide, by the way. I think you're much more than a tour guide. I've heard you. I've watched you at work. How do you account for this? Is it a re-emerging interest in our revolutionary history, or was it always there but neglected?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question there, Joe. I mean, there's a few areas I'd be happy to talk about. One is that sort of prevalent attitude that Ireland is a very separate nation between the north and the south, and I've never felt that way personally. I've always been a one island, one nation believer, 32 county Ireland, but there are people in Dublin who have a little sort of an attitude of that's them. However, you'd be amazed at how many people in this city are United Irelanders, especially these days. I suppose when I started the tour first, I did meet quite a significant amount of negativity. I went to what was then Dublin Tourism and is now essentially Fáilte Ireland. I would have been in my mid-20s, all excited with my new idea to talk about Ireland's struggle. And I remember one of the comments, it's never left me. Oh, Lorcan, that's the Ireland we want to move away from. And it stung me, that comment, you know, and I felt what they really wanted was me to come with this proposal for the Leprechaun tour of Temple Bar, which would have been much more acceptable. But it actually gave me more of a desire to pursue the 1916 tour, because it was a real Basil Fawlty kind of an idea at the time. Don't mention the war for fear that our visitors from abroad might get offended. And honestly, Joe, for many years, it would often be 20 or 30% of people on the tour were from England. And yeah, one or two persons in all the 25 years might have been offended, but by you know, a throwaway comment. But for the most, I think there were people who were genuinely willing to learn what had happened in Ireland over the years, and not to apologize, but it's more important for them to experience how we feel and what it means to us as well. Now, from the perspective of, do you ever hear the people saying, oh, the young people know nothing now?
Yeah.
And that kind of drives me a bit mad, because we do so many school tours, Belfast, Derry, Galway, Kerry, they all come on the 1916 tour with the class, and you'd be amazed at what 11 and 12-year-olds know, very, very aware of their history. And I always think, you know, the future's in safe hands. The kids know their history. And it's amazing how excited they get by it as well. But since July, I started working again on the 1st of July. And for the whole month, I'd say the tour was nearly 95% Irish people, which was great. I love when you get Irish. You can ratchet the tour up a couple of notches. You don't have to explain who, you know, the Fenians were, or who Sinn Féin are, or who the IRA are. The people are already familiar with those terms, so we can take it a bit higher. But now it's great to see the Americans back, and people from Britain as well, you know. So it's not even a job, Joe. I'll be honest with you. I get embarrassed sometimes when people say to you, "What's your job?" And I say, "Well, I'm a tour guide, but I haven't worked for 20 years, really." And I mean that.
Well, funny you're saying that. Last night, I asked someone who I won't name about you, and I was saying, you know, because I really don't see you as a tour guide. I think there's another title which we'll have to invent, maybe a walking lecture or something like that. Because it really is more than just a waltz around Dublin. It's a waltz through history, and very important history, national history, big stuff. But I said to him, and I said, you know, he gets paid for talking to people, and he loves it, and he actually loves it. You know, you'd have to lock the door to stop him doing it. Do you find, are you good? I know you're good at your job, but do you find that communication with people, that engagement, do you obviously enjoy it?
Yeah. I mean, I like people. I do enjoy people. I like to hear new stories. I love to hear where people are from, what they do. I kind of like guessing what people do as well. I think I made a sort of a promise to myself a long time ago that if I ever got bored with the tour, I would stop doing it and pass it on to somebody else. And thankfully, that day hasn't come yet. And I kind of feel now at this stage, it probably won't come. In my life, I suppose, 3 or 4 times I have woken up with a rage and hangover and gone, oh, Jesus, I wish I didn't have to go in today. But then after 10 minutes, you sort of go, yeah, but you remember this is what I do. And then you knock yourself back into shape and you go and do it. But I have never gone, I'm so bored doing this. Also, Joe, I try to tell a different sort of story every day, and maybe vary the route as well. Like, say, lately, we haven't been able to do the introduction to the tour in the bar. So we've been going up to Dublin Castle. And then the whole tour took on a completely different route then as a result of that. So that sort of keeps it fresh. And since my last book, which was on the Tan War, or it's called Ireland's War of Independence, the IRA's guerrilla campaign, I had sort of not avoided that subject, but I hadn't delved in the way I did. And now we mix 1916, the Tan War, and the Civil War all in one. So I've kind of expanded the tour a bit to cover more topics. And again, that keeps it fresh as well, you know. And that's kind of what it's all about. I see some people just spelling out the same sort of phrases every day. And I think, you know, I don't know how you could do that. So I love an old question, brings us off on a bit of a tangent. And that's why I'm enjoying the podcast as well. My wife suggested the podcast. I think it was because when we were locked down, I was just talking at her for a couple of hours every day, the usual talk that I might be doing on my tour. And she was like saying, go on into the shed and do a podcast. So it was more to shut me up as well. But I enjoyed doing the research. You know, Joe, I'll be honest with you, I wouldn't have been able to talk much about, say, the hunger strikes. I would have been able to talk for 10, 15 minutes. But to really delve into the 1980 and 80 hunger strikes, and in fact, the whole blanket protest as well, for me, it was very enjoyable to get the time to research something like that, you know. So again, I tried to see the positivity in the lockdowns. You know, you have to try and find something good about them. And for me, it was the time that we were afforded to do research like that, you know.
I want to ask you about the podcast, but just before we come to that, and you talk about that engagement with the audience and with the people who you are speaking to, are there any questions that throw you? Are there any questions that, you know, you're not expecting, or are there questions that are repetitive?
Not really, no. I mean, I try to say to people at the start of the tour, listen, I don't know everything. And if you ask me a question that I don't know the answer to, I am very happy to just say, look, I don't know. I try not to do that Dublin thing where if you don't know the answer, you make something up very quickly. I try to just say, look, no, you know, like sometimes people might say to me, especially if they're from the States and they think we know everybody who was ever in the IRA, and they say something like, yeah, my granddad was you know, Michael Murphy from Connemara. Do you know him? And I'm kind of going, well, like, you know, there were thousands and thousands of fellas who were in the IRA. So, but I can direct them to the Bureau of Military Archives and what have you. And then sometimes you get a nice surprise where there's someone who you talk about quite a lot, like say, just say Captain Liam Tannum. There's a fella who I would mention pretty regularly. And one day somebody came along on the tour and they said, we're related to a man called Liam Tannum. And I was going, oh yeah, you know, he fired from the top of the Dublin bread company, you know, and told a few things I knew about him. And I suppose they were kind of going, holy shit, this guy, like, you know, he knows everybody. But I did say to them, now listen, he's very well known, you know, he's very famous. You can't know all couple of thousand fellas and women who were fighting in the Rising, you know. But if you single out, you know, a number, that's sufficient. You know, nobody's going to know the full list of everybody who fought. Actually, the figures for membership of the IRA from 1919 to 21 is enormous. You know, the Bureau of Military Archives have a figure, and you can stretch back to company and battalion and brigade, and the figure is 115,000, which is absolutely enormous, especially as it's backed up by, you know, names. Yeah. But of course, the 115,000 were never in the field. You know, you're only looking at a small number, a small percentage of that who were ever in the field. But there was always plenty more to take their place as well. But that's a staggering figure, isn't it? 115,000.
Well, let's not tell RTE that, because according to RTE, the IRA never had any support at any time, anywhere, ever.
Yeah.
So we'll let RTE know that figure in case somebody cries in their teeth. But the point you made earlier on in passing, you know, where we are, we're in the heart, where I am at least, I'm in the heart of West Belfast, the Fold Road. And one of the things since ceasefires and all of that, quasi-normality has been inflicted upon us, is that we have the Costa Guides, which are all ex-prisoners, and then we have another group of people who get some money for being guides. Their knowledge of what West Belfast represents is very, very limited. And I had a run-in recently with a guy walking past. There's a huge mural of Frederick Douglass down at the International Wall in West Belfast. Big, big mural. And this guy was telling people that it was Paul Robeson, the singer. And I passed and I said, excuse me, what did you just say? And he said, I'm just saying this is Paul Robeson. And I said, it's Frederick Douglass. And he went, I don't know a difference. And do you encounter that sort of charlatan nearly when, wow, in your tour? Do you ever come across that?
You hear the odd thing, all right, but Joe, I mean, you were very calm there to not want to throw him into the lagan or something like that, because that sort of a mistake is unforgivable. I would talk a lot about Frederick Douglass myself quite regularly, because of course Daniel O'Connell was great friends with him in a sense, invited him over to Ireland, and Douglas's account of his time in Ireland is absolutely fantastic. I wish the kids of Ireland were all reading Douglas's account of his time, for the affirmative view that he had of the people of Ireland, and saying things like, in all my travels, I never had such a welcome as that when I got to Ireland. There wasn't one premises who said to him, you shall not come in here because of the color of your skin. And also the way he says in his own life as a slave that he never witnessed conditions such as he witnessed in Ireland as well. And that's a very telling sort of a phrase. But to mix him up with Paul Robeson, much as I love Paul Robeson as well, and the interpret he is of a mural, it's incredible. I'm trying to think if I ever heard anybody saying mad things. Not really, not enough for me to kind of want to jump in. It'd be little things you might have heard. There was an issue a few years ago when the General Post Office was being done up, and an independent, Irish independent newspaper of all newspapers, rang the post office and said, as a joke, are you filling in the bullet holes? But the person who was the PR person for the post office said, there are no bullet holes in the post office because this building was knocked down in 1916. And he got in contact with me, the journalist, and he said, listen to this. What do you think of this? And I was saying, well, of course not. The building remains standing and it's peppered with bullet holes. But we had a bit of a bit of a spat, myself and the post office, about whether there were bullet holes. And of course, they are from 1916. So it's incredible to think how some people who are in charge of a building might not know the history of the building, But anyway, we won the battle. I think everybody knows there are bullet holes in the post office.
Let's return. I want to speak about your writing for a moment or two, but let's return to the podcast. So for those who are joining us this evening, access to the podcast, how do they get it? What can they expect to hear?
Well, you can get the podcast on, it's called Spotify, and the other thing is iTunes, right? They're the main pod things. But I notice, I can't list them all, but there are loads of podcast hosts where you can get it as well. It's also on my website, which is 1916rising.com. You can download it for free there. You just have to type into Google Revolutionary Ireland podcast and it'll come up somewhere. The buzz we have is there's no advertising on it. So I kind of like that because I get a bit annoyed when I'm listening to a podcast and an advert for, shaving foam comes up or something like that, and it throws you all together. Another thing I try not to do is talk about COVID on the podcast because I think people want an escape at the moment. And so I found if I'm listening to a podcast, I go off on a nice trip, and then if they mention something about the lockdown, it sort of brings you back down. And I mean, I think people want escape at the moment. So I try to not refer too much to what's going on at the moment and keep it clean.
And can I commend it for those who are students of Irish history, or those who want to learn about Irish history, or those that want to engage? There's fascinating stuff. I mean, we all know bits and pieces, and you make the point earlier on. I certainly am not an expert in Irish history. I have never listened to the podcast, but I didn't learn something. So I can commend it to people, and I think they do. I think they will enjoy it. I want to talk about your writing, but before I go into your writing, I mentioned earlier that you're a lecturer in your own right. And so where does that take you?
Well, I suppose the number of lectures I've given in Dublin or in Ireland, I could probably count them on the two hands. Now, I did have a lovely thing for a few years where I had befriended some people in the States who were on the tour, and they happened to be maybe a professor, and they would say something like, listen, if you're ever in Atlanta, Georgia, give us a shout, we'll have you talk. And I was collecting all these things, and eventually I became very friendly with a few lads from Tennessee, down south. And they said, look, we can fund you to come over and give a talk. So then I had my cards and I made contact with a few other people from all around the States, Kansas and New Orleans, way down south, and up north in Pennsylvania. And I went off to the States to give a few talks over the years then. So I did that 3 or 4 times. Now, I enjoyed that. There was a great buzz, for me personally, to be in front of American students talking about our revolutionary history. And the one thing is, it became quite a trawl at one stage. One time I went to 13 colleges in one go, and I was eating every night and drinking every night. I went for a whole month, and I think I put about 2 stone on. And when I came back, I was like bigger than I even am now. So, but I loved it. It was great crack. But you know, at one time I met this fella from Australia. Liam was his name, and Irish extraction. And he put his arm around me at the end of the tour. He says, "I'm going to bring you down to Sydney." And I was going, "Yeah, sure you are." Like, you know, but I heard from him, from his PA a month later, and she said, "Liam wants to know, will you still come down and talk in Oz?" And fair play to him, you know, he shipped me over there, put me up for a week, and I gave a little talk. So it was a great adventure for me. I mean, I was never going to get to Australia. Like, I had no real ambition even to go that far. It's so very far, but to swim down in the sea there, like, you know, I was just thinking, my God, I'm terrible lucky in that respect, you know. So that's the furthest it's brought me anyway. I don't think I'll ever go that far again, you know.
And despite that travel, and despite all the hamburgers and the bottles of bud that you ever forced to drink against your will, and leaving aside the kangaroo burgers, you're very much a homebird.
Yeah, like, you know, I mean, I lived in England for a few years in the 80s, in the late 80s. You remember yourself when Ireland was very depressed and there was no work. And I think at that stage I had been fired from so many accountancy offices. I was blacklisted. So
All the best people are.
I went over there to England. And in fairness, I think I would have sort of met with enthusiasm from English employers. Like, in those days, the Irish were very hard working. I'm not saying I particularly was, but we knew the value of a job, I suppose, and it was, you know, it was a boom time over there as well. So it was kind of it was an interesting thing. But I think I did nearly 3 years there. But God, I missed home very badly, like, you know, and there was always that call, you know, to return. So I was happy enough to come home in the early 1990s, and yeah, but good to be away for a little bit, you know.
I have listened to you, and I've listened to the podcast, and I've listened to your lectures, and so I'm a fair judge. And you're a very jovial person. You're someone who's a good communicator because they are knowledgeable, but also because they enjoy it. There's one exception, and you may or may not remember it, and it was an interview on RTE, and it was around the Glasnevin controversy, and it was around Charlie Flanagan. And I never seen you as angry around the proposed commemoration for the Dublin Metropolitan Police. As from a historian point of view, you know, why did it make you so angry? And maybe give us some of the background to it.
Well, first, the first I remember hearing about that was in January 2020, and I was actually, it was the same day as I was doing a talk for Scealta. I was very happy to be asked to give a little talk about Irish history and Scealta, and I brought it up at the night. I said, "Listen, you know, folks, I have heard that they're going to have a commemorative event for the police, for the RIC, and for the Dublin Metropolitan Police, and I think we kind of wound each other up later on as well when we were all chatting amongst ourselves." And you know, various vows were made that night to raise this issue. But then it kind of spiraled very quickly over the next few days. And Charlie Flanagan, who got the great nickname Charlie Tannigan as a result of it, was very, very much on the back foot very quickly over it. But I don't think they realized just how angry people were about this, because we were all raised on the milk of how much terror was wrought around Ireland by the Tans and the auxiliaries, who were all essentially policemen, and the RIC as well. Now, like in any army or any police force, you're bound to have some fellas who are good guys. Eamon Broy was basically one of the good guys. Jim McNamara, another good guy. I'm afraid to say that the spy in the castle, Dave Nelligan, was a good guy because he was a very cruel torturer when the Civil War was in action. But anyway, the notion that we should commemorate these guys was just, it wound me up very seriously. And I think I'm winding myself up now, thinking about it again. But they really didn't know how angry people would be about that. And they made a serious error. And I think, in fact, in the election that came soon after, they felt the effects of that as well.
And from a distance, I watched it unfold. And I watched your interview in Glasgow, and I heard you kind of comparing, you know, would the Cemetery in London have commemorated Kevin Barry? I think that was the example you used.
Right.
Why would we be commemorating a force, and you mentioned the RIC, that had, and it predates the Rising, had been exceptionally cruel to Irish people and the poorest of Irish people. And it made common sense. It made, to me, it was just clear. And so I'm in Belfast, and I know this is a bad idea. How did those people, I mean, how did they think that there was merit in commemorating the RIC and the Metropolitan Police?
I know. I mean, you know, besides, even from a Dublin perspective, that the Dublin Metropolitan Police battered strikers to death. And it takes a lot to batter a man to death with a stick. Rodney King is a great example. We remember the length of time that they beat him before he died, you know. The fact, as you mentioned there as well, that this is the same police force who effectively, on behalf of landlordism, evicted people out into the night, where they often perished from the cold, and the same people who shot into the crowd in Mitchelstown, you know, during the land war. So I think it was a very, very poor decision on their part. But, you know, Joe, if you live in an ivory tower, you don't know what the people feel like down below you. So I feel if you're not grounded, and if you're not listening to what people are saying in the pub, you know, I have a funny kind, not a funny, of an amusing example. When the Queen of England came over to Ireland a few years back, and the newspapers were all saying what a wonderful welcome she had. Now, we saw Obama in the same week walking around College Green, high-fiving people. But when the Queen of England was here, there was fencing all around Dublin, and you couldn't get near her at all, you know. So if you listened to how people were reacting to her in the pubs, it was a completely different version as to what newspapers were saying. And it's real, just print what you think people want to hear. But there wasn't tens of thousands of people all waving to her gracious majesty. It was a security risk that cost 30 million euro so that she could ponce around Dublin. But I'm an English Republican as much as an Irish Republican. I would like to see them, you know, introduced maybe to the concept of democracy. And if they don't listen, maybe introduce them to the good old guillotine or something like that as a warning. But I can't say that, can I?
No, you're not allowed to say that. As I say in all the best interviews, swiftly moving on. The 16 Lives Matter series that you were key to. So tell me, if you can, tell me what it is and how it came about.
Well, I had been writing a book on James Connolly, and I started when my boy was born. So he was born in about 2005. And because another child, my daughter, came along a couple of years later, I was still writing. And then all of a sudden it was 3 years later, and I was still banging away. About 2008, but I was getting there. I was nearly finished. And I said to myself, why don't I write 7 books on the 7 signatories? And then my other part of my brain went, that's going to take you forever. And then I thought, well, I'll get 6 other people to write the other books and we'll do a series. And then I was going, do you know what? We've no book on Sean Houston, on Edward Daly, on people you might call the less known of the executed. So I thought, well, why don't we have 16 books? And then at the same time, the idea for 16 lives, there are 16 lives. And also the pun is kind of 16 lives, like it lives on. And when I did a proposal, and this is kind of where my accountancy came in. I did a nice proposal with like page numbers, and I used terminology like market and stuff like that, who we can market this to. And I think my friend Michael O'Brien was impressed by the kind of 10-page proposal. And he actually rang me the next day and he said, listen, we're going for this. And I was overjoyed. But because I'm not an academic, it was very good to bring our friend Ruan O'Donnell in as well.
Yeah.
That gave it a little bit of gravitas. And when we were trying to attract authors to have his name there as, this is an academic as well as a popular sort of a thing. So he was able to bring in people who might not have jumped on board if it was just me, I think one of the best books in the series is Angus Mitchell's book on Roger Casement. And Angus would be a very strong academic on Casement. In fact, I would go as far as to say he's the world expert on him. So it was great to get him involved as well. And then we had people like Helen Litton, who very kindly wrote 2 of the books, she's related to Tom Clark, and Ned Daly. Also people like Honor O'Brullicon, who's related to Joe Plunkett. To have those family stories in there was great. And a lot of things just came together at the same time. I met this wonderful man, probably one of the most wonderful people I kind of met in my life. I'd say he's up there in the top 5. He was the son of Michael Mallon. He has your name, Joe, Father Joe Mallon.
Yeah.
And I met him one day when I had a group of kids down at James Connolly's statue. And I remember where the kids were from, the Glenties in Donegal. And we saw this little old guy, and he was so small. And he was with another fella. And I said to the teacher, that's Joe Mallon. He's in town. And we ran over to say hello to him, And then I told the kids who he was. And they were all only young kids, like 10 or 11. And the minute I said who he was, they all start clapping, and he was very happy with this. But we started to write to each other, and he was a great correspondent. So we wrote to each other for, I suppose, a little over 10 years. And I can't remember where I was going with this story now, but the point is, he told me that there was a young man called Brian Hughes who was writing an MA on his dad. So then, I contacted him and he said, well, I'll write a book, so those lucky sort of things that come together. Yeah.
I'm not so sure that you can describe it as luck. I think probably persuasion is a better description of it. I want to move you on a wee bit, but just that sense, the series was hugely successful. I mean, if anyone has even a passing interest, not of the stories of the executions, but the story of the lives of those who shaped modern Ireland and whose aspirations, are alive today. Is there a sea change or has it always been there? Is that interest, has it always just been below the surface, despite what sections of the media tell us? Or is the is the time we're in, has it reunited?
Yeah, that's very interesting. I really enjoyed the year 2015 and 2016 because 2015 we had a gathering on O'Connell Street, and actually it was organised by RTE, and they wanted to do Ireland the year before the Rising. Okay, so they encouraged people to dress up and what have you, but I think nearly 100,000 people came down that day, and that wasn't even a 1916 theme. And for me, 2016 is like a blur because, well, I was very busy with doing so many tours. You guys brought a lot of union people over from America. I had the great pleasure of bringing a lot of those great union people from the States all around. I didn't get to go to many events because I was sort of working. In fact, Mormon Ira, because I'm very embarrassed by this, that I never got up to the Metropole to see the thing. I just didn't get the time, and I feel awful about that, you know. But like sometimes people say, did you enjoy it? I say, well, I enjoyed what I remember from it. But for me, it was so great for the first time for a long time to get so many Irish people back on the tour again. And I don't think they realized just how excited people were to celebrate and commemorate the events of 1916. And of course, there was all that buzz about, oh, we're not celebrating, but everybody celebrated it.
Of course they were.
They absolutely did. And no matter how many times you tell people, oh, it's just a commemorative event, everyone used the term celebrate 1916. And I loved you're on a bus or you're walking down the road and you see some kids on the way to school, and the kid's dressed as Tom Clark, and the girl is dressed as Countess Markovitz or something, and you know that they're having a pageant in the classroom that day to celebrate it. Like my own son, he was I guess he was about 11 or something like that, and he was chosen as the kid in the school to read the proclamation on Proclamation Day. And they didn't ask the parents, but they were very kind to ask myself to go down. And, you know, I was bursting like with pride seeing him reading the proclamation, you know. So like it was those beautiful little things for me that they're the nice memories, you know. I also, sorry, Joe, I also have a thing I was thinking about recently. I got invited to one state event in my life, and it was the Rossa commemorative event. And I was thinking, there's a man who believed in the use of physical force as a means to gain political recognition, a man who the British called a terrorist of the worst kind. And here was our president and our Taoiseach and the whole cabinet and all the great and the good from Ireland all out at this event in Glasnevin Cemetery. And I found it very satisfying, do you know what I mean? To see how when 100 years passes, how people look upon you then, you know, it's kind of interesting, isn't it?
Well, I think that we're living in very interesting times. I'm old enough, unfortunately, to remember the 50th anniversary. And it was a completely different kettle of fish. It was a completely different nuance. It was something, let's do it, get it out of the road, and let's not kind of tell the world why these people died, why they fought, what they were about, because it may be complicated. I think 2016 was an entirely different prospect. And I think that has to do with what the Irish people would have settled for rather than what they would have been fed. I want to ask you two last questions.
Yeah.
Anybody who's watching this will gather that you're someone who enjoys engagement. And so you talk and you're easy to interview and you're full of stories and you're full of all of that. Do you find it hard to apply the discipline of writing?
Not too hard, not too difficult. Look, like anyone else, I could do with more hours in the day, okay? And sometimes I kind of say to myself, oh God, I better get working on the next podcast, or I better prepare for, I have a Zoom talk with an American university in a couple of days, and I'm kind of thinking I better prepare for that. But I probably won't. I probably will just go and wing it as I always do. But I know I have the luxury of kind of having November, December, and January off from the tour, and I always consider that that's like my summer holiday. So I work daily during the year, and then I know at the end of it, the present is the luxury of a lot of time. So, for instance, I have planned, besides all the DIY jobs that need doing,
Absolutely.
I have plans to really ramp up the number of podcasts that I prepare. I want to work on a little pamphlet for the Civil War. I was going to write a book, Joe, but honestly, it takes a lot out of you, and I'm not sure right now if I have enough time to do, a 200-page book. But I think I'm going to do a sort of a pamphlet that I might even publish it myself and just kind of have it as a thing. Because I wrote on 1916, I wrote on the Tan War. It's a logical progression that I should do something on the Civil War, but I just don't feel like getting stuck into a big book at the moment. So I think maybe some sort of a pamphlet. I think pamphleteering is a great Irish tradition, and I have a good collection of pamphlets, and I love them. And, Irish Republicans for 220 years have been publishing beautiful pamphlets, and it's a great way of getting a message across as well. People are more inclined to read a 32-page pamphlet than they are a 300-page book, so that's a point.
Recently, I was in Dublin supporting the Moore Street campaign, and I know that's very close to your heart. And for many people, they look on aghast that a national heritage site is even at risk, let alone has to be fought for. Would you be confident? Do you think we're going to be able to retain it in a way that's fitting for those who give their lives for Irish freedom?
I'm quite confident because of some of the people who are involved in that, and they are very determined individuals, and I don't think they'll bend over as easily as those developers hoped they would do. That fight has been going on for nearly 20 years now, so that's a significant victory. And I would say that's a victory because they haven't built what they wanted to build there, which was a huge mall. And we need to get the message to government circles that we don't want more malls and more hotels. We had a good protest the other day. I happened to get the time to go on it. There was about 3,000 people who walked from the cobblestones down to Merchants Arch and then around to civic offices to protest against not the knocking down of Merchants Arch, but the building up on top of it. So if we do any building at the moment in Dublin, we need to build homes for people and not more hotels. And that's coming from someone who likes tourism because they come on my tour. But if we end up with a city as sort of, soulless as certain parts of London have become and certain parts of New York have become, we lose what we have. And that is, we're a historic center for Europe, and we need to build upon that notion that you don't go wrecking our beautiful, dirty city in some ways, like Moore Street has its place. We need those beautiful women, the traders, to be there forevermore if possible. but we need that terrace to be kept intact rather than be swamped by, mighty apartment, hotel sort of stuff that they're building, but certainly homes is what we should be building, not hotels.
I think that Moore Street is more than the heart of the aspiration for Irish freedom. It's the very soul. It epitomizes the soul of that, and for it even to be jeopardized is just it's just completely unacceptable.
Yeah.
The last question, as I promised you, we've been speaking for an hour, believe it or not, and it's gone like that. How do people who will watch this and who want to go on your tour, how can they get the privilege of going on it?
Well, you're very kind, Joe. I have a website like everybody these days, and it's very simple. It's 1916rising.com. So that's 1916 and then the word rising and then .com. And you can book tickets there. I'm not sure what I'm going to do this winter. I might do a few weekend tours. So, I think there's still so many people in Ireland who are not ready to sort of go away yet. So I think, God, we've had so many people from Belfast down this year. It's just been great altogether. So, and Derry as well. And in fact, all over Ireland. So, I might put on some weekend tours in November and maybe early December as well. But I'm definitely back in action from around February or March next year as well.
I want to commend that to anybody who has an interest of the city of Dublin and seen through the revolutionary eyes of that period. When I spoke to you last night, I threatened to ask you to sing a song. I've let you off the hook, and really, I didn't mean to let you off the hook. Our time has run out.
Yeah.
So can I thank you, Lorcan, for being fascinating, such an appreciated and an easy to interview individual.
Well, thank you, Joe. Thank you very much. It's your own very easygoing manner that made me relaxed. And I actually forgot we were doing an interview. I thought more like we were just having a chat. So thank you for having me, and thanks for your kind words as well. They're very much appreciated.
The podcast, tell me again how people access it.
Revolutionary Ireland podcast. That's just Googleable. And it's on all the platforms, as they say.
Lorcan, for your time, for your experiences, and for your interest. Thank you.
Gurna mágat, Zachara. Gurna míle mágat.